So here are the disciples in a boat, sailing out into the lake. There was nothing extraordinary about this story for them. Many of them were fishermen. They knew the lake. They knew the boats. They knew how to sail. When Jesus said, let's go to the other side, that was fine. They were going to push off from shore and sail across the lake. But notice where they are when the storm comes and they get afraid. They're in the middle. They haven't stopped in the middle. They're going through the middle towards the other side. And that is when the fear kicks in. Why is that? When they were used to the lake, they were used to the boats, they knew what they were doing. Why suddenly are they afraid? They would have seen storms in the past, surely. I believe they begin to be afraid not because of the ocean, not because of the boats, but because they're going into what they did not know. They knew the lake, yes, but they knew the lake to fish on. What did that mean? They would go out into the lake, they would do their fishing, and they would come back to the place where they had left off. The difference this time is that they are not going out into the middle of the lake in order to come back. They are going across the lake, which is a new experience for them. Why would they bother going to the other side? They were fishermen. They didn't need to do that. But now Jesus is in the boat with them, and he has called them to a new experience of going beyond where they've ever been before. They suddenly find themselves in a position of fear. And we do this all the time. When we're doing what we've always done, we live in a place of safety. Yes, things may come in that rock that boat, as it were, and make us afraid. But because we're in our place where we've always known, because we're within our own experience, we can draw on what we've done before. We can rely on our own ability to get us through because we know the parameters of where we are. But when we step into what we do not know, we lose the ability to root the situation in what we know, in what we've done, in what we've experienced before, because we haven't experienced it before. And this is why Jesus changes the context of the story by simply saying to his friends, let's go to the other side. Because they would have said, oh yeah, we know the lake. We've done this 1,000,000 times. And look, they're fine until they get to the middle and go beyond it. And then the fear comes because suddenly they're not relying on their own experience, but they have to rely on the one who called them to the other side, to the unknown. And so too do we. We have to know the one who has formed the story of life, if we are going to be able to cope in the unknown places which we end up in this life. If we don't trust the one who calls us, we will not be able to go out in full confidence into the places we don't know. Why? Because we are living in a story that is beyond us. Every single person who has ever lived is part of a story, is part of something bigger than them. And when we're in a place where we can kind of watch every part of the story and rein it into what we know, rein it into what we've experienced, to be able to root it back to the things we've seen and done, we're okay. But the moment the lid is taken off that story and we realize how big the world is, how big the lake is, we can be fearful. Because what happened with these disciples was they went out into the middle of the lake, which they knew, but now Jesus is calling them to the other side where they hadn't been. And you can't blame them. They had no need to go to the other side. But suddenly, because Jesus is in the boat, they're going. Why? Because by inviting Jesus into their lives, by bringing Jesus into the boat with them on the lake that they knew, they were entering into someone else's story. And that person was God. Creator God. And when they invited Jesus into the boat, they were actually entering into his greater story. A story where he is the main character and the author is his Father in heaven. Because God has written the story of creation from the beginning to the end. He has written the whole thing. He knows the plot. He knows the plan. He knows what's going to happen in the end. And the Father has revealed Jesus as the main character, the Son of God. The one of which he said, "This is my Son whom I love. Listen to him." He is the main character. And just like every good story, he is on every single page of it, whether we see his name or not. Why can I say that? Because like every good story, the character's name doesn't have to be physically on the page to know that he is there or she is there, because the whole story relates back to them. If you take the central character out of any story, the story loses momentum, it loses its plot, and the reader ends up just treading water in the middle of this vast story that has lost its conclusion, lost its purpose, lost its end. But if the character stays in the story, it has purpose. Every page has purpose, whether the character's name is there or not. And here is the thing about Jesus. God has revealed him as the main character of all the stories in all the world. And some of us were privileged to know about Jesus when we were little. And right from day one, his name has been written on the story of our lives and is on every page. For some of us, we weren't born into an understanding of Jesus. We didn't grow up hearing about him. In fact, some of us may not have even heard of him for many, many years. But when you invite him in, when you begin to understand that he is the main character of all the stories in all the world, you look back over your story and you start to see, he has been there. In fact, the whole story has been building to the revelation of Jesus Christ as the central character. That when the Father said to the world, "Come to me," through Jesus, my Son. That when he said that, he wasn't announcing it out of the blue like it had never been said before. What he was doing was he was just unveiling the story that has already partly happened and inviting us into it. You may not have known Jesus before. You may have heard about him and not understood him. But can I just say this to you? He knows you. He knows every page of your story, the good bits and the hard bits. He knows your triumphs. He knows your mistakes. He knows your joys and he knows your pain. He is the one who is for you because he loves you. He is the one who wants to be with you. And the moment you begin to realize that this is all his story, is the very moment he begins to welcome you into his story, into his way of doing things. into the unknown. He said to the disciples, look, guys, we're not just going to go on the lake today. We're going to go across it to the other side. The disciples were unsure. Yeah, of course. They hadn't done it. But that was okay because Jesus was with them. When the storm came, what is it they said? Jesus, don't you care if we drown? Jesus gets up, rebukes the storm. What did the disciples say? Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. My friends, the story didn't end in the middle of the lake with the storm all around them. The story ended when they got to the other side. Why? Because the author of the story and the central character of the story had said, let us go to the other side. The reason the storm didn't stop them is because they realized the purpose of God, that he was taking them somewhere. And that in their day of trouble, they could call on Jesus. And what did Jesus do? He showed them who was in charge. It says, doesn't it? He stood up and he rebuked the storm. Quiet, be still. Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. Friends, he stood up in that moment when they cried out to him. He faced their issue, their fear, their storm, their pain, their struggle. He stared it down with all the authority of heaven and he said, I am in charge, not the storm. Be still. And it was so. My friends, what are you facing that causes you to be afraid? Call on the name of the Lord. In this moment, call on Jesus, the Savior of the world, the central character, the hope of glory, the hope of life. Call on him and he will stand for you. And he will rebuke the wind and the waves. He will take away that which is against you. And he will say, I am with you. Do not be afraid. And even if we don't see the storm disappearing instantly, we know that because he is good and he is strong, we can trust him in the storm. Because there is a purpose in all that God has done. And he is taking us somewhere. And that place is into the fullness of his presence for those who believe. I asked my friends this week, who is your God? I didn't mention Jesus in the question, but all of them came back to Jesus. Why? Because they had come to see that actually their stories didn't make sense without the central character, Jesus. And as they realized, they were willing to give their stories over to Jesus, to bow to his greater story. And to say, Lord, I am happy to be part of your story. I haven't seen you written on every page before, but now I do. I see you working through me, and in me and for me. I wonder, who is your God today? Who is in charge of your story? Who is the author of your life? I pray that you will let Jesus in. That you will be able to say, Jesus is my God. And that from that, you will experience the greatest story ever experienced on the face of the planet. The story of Jesus and of his kingdom and of his gospel and of his cross and of his resurrection and of his hope. Because through that story, we enter into the fullness of life. Be blessed today. There's a comment, there's an opportunity to ask questions, to comment through the form at the end of the service. You can send that in, I'll get it, I'll receive it, and I'll respond to you. It'd be great to chat in that way. Thank you. God bless.